Hello, everybody. Welcome to maybe the end of MongoDB World 2018. At least if you're going to be here, you'll be here till the end of it. I'm sorry. So this is user authorization without you. We're going to go over integrating MongoDB and LDAP. Lots to go over. As has been said before, my name is Iwakiri. That is definitely a headshot of me, not a paddle. But I'm a technical services engineer, work with the support team. So that means that I make the world a better place, or at least a working place. But I do play table tennis matches on demand, so if you guys ever want to play, like right now, maybe not right now, but in a bit, anytime. OK, so the agenda for today, and let me know if this is too small. I can't do anything about it yet. The LDAP primer, we're going to start off with an LDAP primer. So if anybody's here who has not worked with LDAP, hopefully we can get you caught up to speed, get you a little bit of an overview of how things work and what you guys are going to need to do to set things up. We'll go over our terminology, the LDAP query format, and from there, we'll go into what you need to do in MongoDB to have MongoDB set up and have authorization running. We'll do a knowledge check. Actually, we'll have one in between there, but we'll have a knowledge check after that, make sure that there's nothing else that we need to cover. And then we'll go right into our tutorial, which is actually going to be more towards the last half of it. And I'll set up a MongoDB instance for us. You guys can see how it is when you set it up. Actually, not too difficult when you know what you're doing. And then we'll look at our utilities that you can use to set up, to help you with your setup, make sure that you don't run into any problems that you can't troubleshoot on your own. And then if we have extra time, we'll go over some more questions, or if you want me to run over new things, I'll set it up for you. OK, so maybe some of you are here because you need to add 30,000 users to your MongoDB database, and that was due yesterday. And if you're anything like me, you would have said, please, no, not like this. Or maybe you need LDAP because you need to implement single sign-on for PCI compliance. In which case, if you're anything like me, you might say something like, well, actually, I can fix this. If we just get maybe 50-ish people in a small auditorium, we can get it all set up and figure it out. So diving right into it, we're going to talk about what is LDAP. LDAP stands for Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. And you might be asking, what is that in the corner? It's example.com. Actually, lots of you have been there or probably seen it. Example.com, in this iteration, we have a slightly darkened path, so to indicate what I might be talking about at the time. Otherwise, it's going to go away. All right. So why do we use LDAP? LDAP is used because it's relatively fast for lookups, especially when you have a large database of users. It's centralized, so it's easy to access from a lot of places. And it's integrated with Windows. So if you're using Windows, it's already there. And that's why a lot of people use it, I guess. So disclaimer, I am not an expert in LDAP. I work for MongoDB. So you might, for those of you who are already Active Directory admins, you might say, hey, Kip, that's actually completely wrong. That is not how that works. And I'll say, well, it works. So, but if you have anything that you'd like to correct me on, absolutely, let's feel free to raise your hand, reach out, and just say, let's get it all corrected so nobody goes away with bad information. But I'll do my best not to give you any. All right. Lots of information on this slide. We're going to go over two major things here. One is that there are two basic types of things in Active Directory. And this also applies to like Open LDAP. So this isn't specific to Active Directory, but we'll be working with Active Directory in this tutorial. So the first object, or the first type of thing, is going to be our domain component. And the domain component is the top level of the directory tree. I like to think of it, you could consider it the root or the top. However you want to visualize it, we're going from the top down today. In our example.com directory, you can see that our DC is broken up, or each piece of the domain is broken up into a piece called a DC. So we have our DC equals example and our DC equals com. It's an overloaded term. DC also stands for domain controller or, Delta Copilot. I don't know. Everything else, other than domain components, starting with our organizational units, are going to be objects. These are things that you can query the database for, and they are literally just aggregations of keys and values. They're key value pairs, all strings, as far as I know. Organizational units are the first one we'll go over because And what they do is they're just like a folder for things. So if you want to store users or other objects underneath them, they're just a logical grouping. Everybody has seen, well, I hope everybody has seen something like it. But they're commonly confused for security groups. Security groups are objects just like everything else, but unlike security groups, users don't exist underneath them. They're actually referenced by an attribute that is part of the security group. So as I mentioned, objects are key value pairs. So what a security group will have is a series of member attributes, and those member attributes will have a path to the user that belongs to that group. So in my example here, I use security admins or u equals place, dc equals example, dc equals com for my user, or for the security admins group. And then my user could belong to that. And the way that it would be referenced is there would be a member attribute inside of the security group, and then my name would be the value of that attribute. And we'll see that in just a second. Lastly, I indicate the person object here, and I have 3 abbreviations set: the domain, the distinguished name, the user principal name, the SAM account name. Lots of names and aliases for all the same person. You can even call me Charles. It'd be okay. I'd be confused. It'd be fine. So, looking at our user. So in this up here in the black, that is our example user. Might be a little difficult to see. I'm going to highlight it. Don't worry. But on the left-hand side, we'll highlight now. We can see our distinguished name on the left, and then on the right, our string value, right, for the distinguished name attribute. So the distinguished name is your full path to your object. So if my object is my user here, and we see that it's highlighted, great job, Kip. We have my Kip user is underneath users, example, com. The full path, cn equals Kip, comma, cn equals users, comma, dc equals example, comma, dc equals com. I don't know about you, but it is incredibly tiresome to speak out, much less type out, and I'll say it again later. Copy paste your distinguished name whenever possible. It'll come up later. Okay, so distinguished name. One thing that I'll mention here is that it's guaranteed to be unique. So the distinguished name can change if you move your object between different groups or between different organizational units, but it's always going to remain unique, or it must be unique. In addition to that, we have our user principal name. The user principal name also guaranteed to be unique. This username is any username that I select for my user with the domain appended at the end. The domain must match the domain that the user belongs to. So if I belong to example.com, my username, Kip, at example.com. Username can be anything. So again, if you're still referring to me as Charles, I would be Charles at example.com. And you can absolutely refer to this person object. Last on our list, at least on the list previously given, we have our SAM account name. A SAM account name is just the username. Nothing special about it. Also guaranteed to be unique in Active Directory. It's not by default in Open LDAP as far as I know, but Active Directory guaranteed to be unique. And the way I see it in the field is that users have a SAM account name that corresponds to their employee ID. So I might have an employee ID of A12345. I gave that to myself. I just made it up. Anything that I want must be unique. So you're not going to be able to enter it if, for instance, this gentleman is also A12345. Next on the list is the CN, which is our common name. Common name shows up all over the place. So LDAP is based loosely on X500, Directory Access Protocol. And common name is used for the relative distinguished name, which is a unique path to a user, but not the full path. We're not really too concerned with it. I'm just going to bring it up because it shows up everywhere. What you'll notice is that we have CN equals Kip for my user. We have CN users for a organizational unit. And I'll bring it up now. That's kind of like a Windows thing. We call CN users because it's special. It is special. And then we have SG. We have our security group. You can also see it there. CN equals security admins. And we'll talk about how we access these objects as we go into the tutorial. Last thing that I'm mentioning on this particular slide, we're totally going to mention lots of more things, is the member of attribute. And you'll notice that in the member of attribute, we have two of them. Attributes are not guaranteed to be unique the way that, well, some attributes are unique. Member of is not unique. CN is not unique. You could have, maybe it is. You can have lots of the same attribute, different values for each. So when we're querying my user, we could find multiple member of attributes, and those would correspond to my membership to different groups. Active Directory, this is a calculated field. Open LDAP, it doesn't actually exist. It can be created. But because it's a calculated field, it's generally difficult to get literally any string into there, but you can absolutely do it if you try very, very hard. Cool. So next, we're going to go over the LDAP query format. I know that there's been a lot of information. We'll get a little bit of time for questions in just a second. But the LDAP query format has 4 pieces, and they're delimited by question marks. The first piece is going to be the base DN. So this is the path to where you're going to start your search in the LDAP directory tree. In this case here, I've chosen that we start at OU equals place, DC equals example, DC equals com. Again, it's not too difficult as long as you're kind of visualizing that you're going to start at this directory, and then we're going to search underneath it. Get our question mark, and then we have our attributes to return. So the attributes to return, again, objects are just collections of attributes, and so we can actually do like a projection on this and say, all right, well, instead of returning everything, just give me the distinguished name or the common name or the email address for a user. And that's where you would fill this in here. This is a comma-separated list of attributes that you know exist for the user. Next is our scope. 3 options here, and this is how far down the tree we're going to search from our base DN. 3 options. The first is base, which searches only the base. It returns exactly the base. Because you can't query on the DCs, this means that your scope must start at an object. And so it's also very fast. So if you know the base DN or if you know the distinguished name for an object that you want, it's very quick to just put your base DN as the object and do a search of base. Next is the one level. One level searches one level underneath. Critical piece here is that it doesn't search the base for whatever reason. So if I set my base DN to OU equals place, I'll be able to return our unknown user in the corner and the security admins group. Both objects would return in that kind of query. Lastly, we have our subsearch. Subsearch is, as you'd expect, a recursive lookup. It is the default, so in certain implementations of LDAP queries, you can just skip it. But we'll go over that later. And finally, we have our filter. LDAP is a database. You're asking for all this information. Sometimes we don't want all the objects. So what if we want only the people, or we only want people named Kip, or Carl, or Charles? Well, in that case, what you do is you'd set your filter at the end. You set a list of attributes that you want to return and check those values. So in this case, in the corner there, I have user principal name equals kip@example.com. And we know that that matches with my user, so it'll return my user exactly. OK, so quick little period here for questions. So if you have anything that you'd like to ask about. OK, yes. That I don't know. That is a good question. I will find out later, maybe.
On the filter, like, why is that needed? I guess. You have the base DSN or the attributes to return, which you use a principal name. So why would you need a filter?
Yeah. So the question. So OK, let's go back. First question was, are the slides going to be available? I hope the slides will be available. If not, the video will be available. So.
Someone told me that I asked in a previous seminar, and they said that for all of them, the PDF should be uploaded.
OK, yeah. So we'll have PDFs of the slides available. Great. Thank you.
PDF them.
OK, next is for the filter. The question was, do you need to have a filter if you're searching on the base already? The answer is no, you don't, because potentially you could add a filter that makes it so your search doesn't work. But if you're going to search on an object and do a base level search, yeah, there would be no reason to put a filter. Question?
Is it, when you define base DN,
Okay, yeah, this is a great question. I'm going to cover this exact scenario in the tutorial, but the short answer for you is that in the LDAP query language, you cannot do it. You can only search a single OU at a time. There are very, very complicated ways around it, but let's just say that it's not possible for the scope of this conversation. Anything else? Okay. So we're going to go through a quick example. We're going to talk about, we're going to craft a query real quickly here. Conceited as I am, I'm going to search for myself again. And so we're going to start off by filling in our base DN. Possible base DNs here could be DC equals example, comma, DC equals com, or we can use the CN equals users OU. And we'll start there. So we'll start at CN equals users, DC equals example, DC equals com. And we fill that in there. Next are the attributes to return. For this example, I don't really need to do anything, so I'm just going to return the common name, male, and a member of. Yeah, that seems like a reasonable thing to return. Our scope will be sub because it's the default. And we'll set our our filter to our user principal name is equal to kip. So ostensibly, the user that's next to kip in the diagram does not have a user principal name, kip at example.com. In fact, it must not be possible. Let's not get there. Go into the realm of impossibility right now. So this is our query, and this will indeed return my user. Other things that we can do with this query are we could remove the sub search, right? So sub is by default. By default, it will be sub. When you're actually setting up queries in MongoDB, you will need to put in your scope. The other alternative here is, what if you want to return all of the attributes? So if you want to return all attributes, you put in nothing. So you have your CN equals users, DC equals example, DC equals com, and then you put in 2 question marks in series and move on with your filter, or move on with your query. Another thing that we might want to do is we might want to search for, so say we don't want to search for exactly my user. We want to search for all users. So as mentioned earlier, we'll remove the filter, and now 2 objects are returned, for both of the users underneath CN equals users. Another search that we could do is we could search for just the base. So this base search will return just our base, which would be our CN equals users group, our organizational unit. OK, questions about the query. This is like the official query break or questions break. We can go through it again. Anything that you'd like to see on the query, we're going to run through it. So it's not like critical that we go through it now. OK, so we'll say goodbye to our example.com database. See you later. It was great working with you. You will be back, I'm sure. Yes, lots of example.com. So native LDAP authorization in MongoDB. There are 2 things that I need to go over before we move forward. What is the difference between authn and authz? So authn is short for authentication, and the question is, who are you? So when you're authenticating to your database, you're proving that you are the person that you log in with. This is typically, I'm using my username and password to log into the database, to log into our database. Authz, what are you allowed to do? So now that you've proved that you are kip, what are you allowed to do, kip? Well, let's see what you have to do, or what you're able to do. So why do you want authorization in MongoDB? Or specifically, why do you want native LDAP authorization? So if we go back to our scenario where we're adding 30,000 users to the database, somebody, somewhere, went through all of the effort to put these users into LDAP, right? And if we don't turn on authz, what we're saying is that we're going to reach out to the LDAP server, find out that the user exists, and now that we know that the user exists, we're going to come back to MongoDB and then query MongoDB for that user and say, what are you allowed to do? That's crazy talk. I mean, with 30,000 users that are going to get added to the database, you're now creating and maintaining 60,000 users, right? You're creating them in LDAP and in MongoDB. It's crazy. Use authz, please use authz. There are times when you might not want to, like if you have very few users, like I'm going from 2 to 4 users. OK, fine. Use authn. I'm going to assume that everybody agrees with me, though, and we're going to move forward. 2 things that you need to learn in addition to everything that we've already gone over. There are the 2 pieces in MongoDB are the user to DN mapping and the authorization query template. So these two pieces, the user to DN mapping is an optional field. And what it does is that it converts a username that a client logs in with into a distinguished name. I know that I said this. Distinguished names are incredibly difficult to type and to remember. So having some sort of login that isn't saying, type in your CN equals crazy string, I can just say login with Kip. And then MongoDB will now convert Kip into a distinguished name. So we can do a quick base search in LDAP. The user to DN mapping is an array of documents containing two fields. These are the match field and the LDAP query or substitution field. The first one, match, is a regex match. So I don't have time to go over what regex is or how regex works here, but I highly recommend regex 101, regex expr, lots of different places to learn regex. It's not too difficult, but for most of our queries, we're going to be using just capture everything. We'll go over it a little bit more in a second. So next, we have our match field in our document, and now we can choose one of two other fields to include in this document. The first is an LDAP query, which is going to essentially do a second LDAP query, or the first LDAP query, and find the user and return the DN. Alternatively, if we know the DN that we want, we can type it in once and do a straight substitution for whatever the user types in. So if a user types in Kip, we can substitute Kip into a query, or we can substitute Kip into a specified distinguished name. We'll see that in a bit. Lots of seeing that in a bit. We'll get there. Next is the query template. So the query template is the query that you're actually going to run that determines what you are authorized to do. And whatever returns from this query is going to be compared against MongoDB's database, specifically against roles in the admin database. So if we're searching for for all of the groups that I belong to, say we're searching for the Kip user and the member of attribute, all the member of attribute values that return will need to be matched against MongoDB to make sure that to determine the roles and privileges that I'll be granted when I log in. So, okay, that was cool. All right, 5 easy steps. Logging in seems really complicated. There's lots to do, but there's just 5 things that we need to do every time. We're going to log in with the username. The username is going to be optionally converted to a user to DN mapping. The username is then going to be run against the authorization query template. Whatever returns from the query template is going to be compared against the MongoDB roles at admin, and then you are granted access, or maybe you're not granted access. But as an example, going back to my user, I'm going to log in with Kip as our, we're going to log in, try and find my user. So Kip is my username. This is what I've typed into my shell, my driver. I'm saying log in with my user. We're going to run that through a user to DN mapping. Again, our array of documents, we have our single document in this case, and we're going to match everything that the user typed in. And that's found with the open parenthesis, period, plus close parenthesis. So matching everything that I type in, and we pipe that into our LDAP query. And what it's going to do is that it's actually going to fill in for what I capture is going to be put into a special token I call it token 0, which is equivalent to the regex capture group 0. So if we look at our query, it's going to query DC equals example, DC equals com, doing a sub search, returning all attributes, doing a sub search, and returning the user principal name is equal to kip at example.com. That will return my distinguished name, which is listed below, and my username is now converted. There's no more kip login. Now my user is effectively logging in with cn equals kip, cn equals users, dc equals example, dc equals com. Now that our user has been converted, we have our new distinguished name. That username is now run against the authorization query template. In this case, there's the common default that we see is user, which is a special token for the username. So whatever username that you get from either the login or your user to DN mapping, put it here. And then searching for member of, or returning the member of attribute for my users, and then doing a base search. So returning all of the, returning exactly my user, because my user is the distinguished name, right? So we're searching a base search on my user's distinguished name, which returns just my object. And then looking at the member of fields. We know that the member of fields here, because I have the example back down in the corner, that'll be cn equals security admins, OU equals place, DC equals example, DC equals com, and then literally any string. So if I have a role in MongoDB with either of those strings, case sensitive, then I will be granted access. And my slide kind of stops there. It's weird. OK. This is the same as if you were to just do a comparison by running a db.getSibling database and then get roles. Finally, access, or not. I get access. It's cool. Don't worry. All right. Quick questions. Another quick questions section here. Yeah, this one.
So what is this authorization that whatever access any grants, they are in the LDAP? The rules are there?
Yeah, so the question is, and make sure that I'm saying this correctly or I'm articulating it right, but the question that he asked was, the authorization query, are the roles in LDAP or are they in MongoDB? OK, so what's actually happening is that your user has attributes that have some string value, right? So they have an attribute that indicates their membership to a group that exists in LDAP. So the CN security admins group exists in LDAP. My user, Kip, has an attribute called member of, which corresponds to the which has the distinguished name of that user's or of that group. Once we find out all the groups that Kip belongs to in LDAP, using an LDAP query, we compare the results with what MongoDB has in its roles database, or in the admin database under roles. And I'll show you an example in a bit, too. So, yeah.
How do you, when you get integration database, how do you integrate the tools? Like, for existing database, it will put the LDAP rules and it will have a read and write to this for the existing user. If you have a new user with a freshly created database, how do you implement the rules?
OK, so if you have a freshly created database, and let's say that this is a MongoDB database that you're spinning, like a new server instance or a new server process, right? You don't need to create the user in MongoDB because everything exists in LDAP. So when you query, what you do need to create is you'll need to create roles that match to the user's groups. And we'll do an example of that. Any other questions? I think I saw one.
What happened to the password or server ticket that seems to be missing from this whole looks like they give the username and the login?
So users will still need to give their password. So in this case here, when you're doing an authentication against LDAP, it's going to ask you for you need to provide a password to authenticate with the LDAP server.
What I'm asking is where does it plug into this whole
Oh, that's a great question. So when do you put in your password? So when I put in my client username, I would also have to put in my password. I think maybe your concern might be, well, what if I want to use single sign-on or Kerberos authentication, or I have a ticket that's coming in? That would be delegated, or that ticket would be provided through some other functionality. In this case here, we're just using login, username, password as our login. So, anything else?
Can we have a mixed authentication, the part of user going to the lab and part of the accounts authenticating against KDC?
That is a more difficult question to answer. So the question was, can you have some of your users authenticating against LDAP and some of them authenticating against Kerberos or KDC? So the reason why it's difficult is because once you turn on authorization in MongoDB, any authentication authorization attempts that are run against the $external database will be funneled into LDAP no matter what. So if you want you can absolutely log in with a Kerberos authentication, and you can set it up to use LDAP or Kerberos, Scrum Shell 1. That user will then need to be authorized against LDAP. So if you have LDAP authorization set up, anybody who logs in using a $external database will also need to authorize against. You'll authenticate wherever you like, and then authorize against LDAP in this configuration. So this is one of those times when you may not want to use LDAP authorization is when you have split authentication and you need users specifically to authorize based on database rules. Yeah.
Sure, as I recall, you can have both screenshot and LDAP authentication authorization in the cluster.
Yes. OK. So we're going to do it live here. I'm going to hop into my shell, and we're going to do a quick setup, hopefully answering some other questions that might come up. I have no idea how stable this HDMI cable is, so it may have some trouble. But what we'll do is we'll start up a quick. And you might be asking yourself, Kip, well, why didn't you turn this on earlier? It's because my license has expired. So we'll check out our Active Directory users in just a bit. We'll skip ahead just a little bit forward, and we're going to start by immediately trying to start a MongoDB instance. So I have my server here, and I have a configuration file inside. OK. Quick disclaimer, I make typos all the time. So if you see something, say something. No, you don't have to. But I'll do a quick poll on a lot of things. I am definitely going to make some mistakes, and when I do make those mistakes, we're just going to troubleshoot them as if you were setting it up yourself, because I suspect people make mistakes just like me, but sometimes I don't know. People are so good at things. All right. So setting up our configuration file, we have our base database that we're going to set up, going nothing special as far as our configuration there, and we know that we're going to set up security. So the first thing that we're going to type in is security. And then we're setting up authorization. So the next thing that we'll set up is authorization enabled. And now that we've typed it in, I recommend that anybody that's not working on prod do this. You immediately go to the beginning and you comment it out. Because actually, all of the authentication steps will work without authorization enabled. So when you're testing things, it's great to be able to create users, create roles, test out your authentication beforehand, and then turn it on once you're ready. So our authorization is going to be disabled for right now. All right, so setting up our LDAP settings. Oh, yes, another thing. If I get going too quick and you need me to slow down, definitely let me know. Don't mind going slower, talking slower, thinking slower. It's all right. So LDAP. First thing that we're going to do is we're going to input our servers that we want to connect to. So I have it conveniently set up that we're going to connect to a server called DC. You can put anything. There's a couple different things that can be set here. It is a string. So I might also put in dc.ldap.kip.com, which is my DC. I can also optionally include the port. 389 is the default. You might use 636 if you're using TLS. 38. No, that's it. You can use the global catalog if you like, but I'm not going to go over it here. For convenience, I'm just going to put in DC. Next is the bind. And I didn't talk about this earlier, but binding to the database is essentially just logging into it. So you're logging into the database with a user that already exists. And this is going to be in the case of like logging into the LDAP database, not your MongoDB database. So when we bind our user here, we can choose any user that exists in the database. So we'll set our query user, and we'll be kip@ldap.kip.com.
So for users, do you have to put them all in like that, or just one?
Just one. So typically, this will be a service user. The question was, do I need to have a query user for all of the users that are going to log in? And the answer is no. Your bind user is going to be a special user. Oftentimes, you'll see companies use service users for this purpose, and they log in, and then this is the user that's going to be running the searches against the LDAP database. So my query password is password. Please don't tell anyone. It's a secret. All right. Next, we have our transport security. And I have conveniently set this to none because sometimes this is what you do in a security talk. Anyway, TLS is slightly more difficult to set up. I didn't want to set it up today, so we're going with transport security none. The default is TLS, so if you don't include this field, you'll be using TLS by default. Connect over 636. OK. Finally, we are to our special settings, the ones that we went over. Another question. Is this large enough for everyone? Everyone's good with this? Good? Okay. Yeah, sure. Better? More? Let's go. Great. You guys are supposed to call me out on any of these things. Like if you're like, hey, that's too small, just raise your hand. I'm ready. I'm generally ready. Okay. So back to where we're going. We're going to set up our user to DN mapping. Actually, before that, where's my mouse? There we are. I'm going to log in here so I don't have to. Also special with Windows is going to tell me that I have updates to fill out, updates to do. I'm just going to forget. OK, user DN mapping, array of documents. Got an array of documents containing 2 fields. We have our match field, and after that we have, we're going to do an LDAP query for this demonstration, right? So in our match field, we're going to capture everything into capture group 0, and in our LDAP query, we actually don't know what to put in here because I haven't shown you yet. So we'll go back over to our VM. Let's take a look at our users here. And when you get deep enough into the number of VMs that you're running on a single machine, it gets very, very slow. So please forgive me as we go into users and computers management. It is trying very hard, I promise. OK, so 3, 2, 1, I believe. There we are. OK, here's my Active Directory. You can see up here in the top left-hand corner, I have my ldap.kip.com domain. And underneath, we have our cn equals users. I have a bunch of different OUs like OU Mongo, OU Place, OU Sum, just named arbitrarily. And here is the user that we logged in, that we're using for our bind user. Notice that I have a first name set to simple name, a last name set to something easy, and a display name, Kip is cool, definitely true, and an email address that is actually not the same as my domain. All I'm trying to point out here is that you can have anything in a lot of these fields. Like it's not getting checked anywhere. So here we have our user login name. Our user logon name is Kip. Notice the appended domain here matches the domain that's set. This is our user principal name. Also mentioned earlier is that I can set this to anything that I want. So if I want to be someone a little bit cooler, I might log in with Kip Prime. But we'll just keep it as Kip at ldap.kip.com, user principal name. Below that is the user logon name for pre-Windows 2000, which corresponds to your SAM account name. And the SAM account name, that's time for the first, yeah, great. Whoa. All right, so this could, again, be anything that I want. Doesn't have to correspond to anything else in the database. Set up my name, my user Kip here. Yeah. Do not apply the changes. It's cool. One thing to point out here is our distinguished name, cn users, kip.com, copy paste whenever possible, and we'll go back to our terminal. So we have our LDAP query. We know the user that we want to search for. So our query, we're going to start under dc equals LDAP, dc equals kip, dc equals com. We have 3 different fields to set. So our first one are the attributes to return. We're going to return all attributes by default, so that'll be fine. We'll do a sub search because this is the top of my domain, so we want to do everything underneath. And then finally, we'll set a filter. So in this case, I want to look for user principal name is equal to whatever the user types in at ldap.kip.com. Right? So I'm searching. The intention here is that my user will log in with the word kip, and that will be piped into the user principal name equals kip at ldap.kip.com. OK. Let me fix one thing. We need single quotes. And please don't be too critical of my VI skills. I'm getting better. Probably. Maybe. OK. Have our user to DN mapping set. Last thing that we need to set is our authorization query template, which is authz. And then finally, our query template itself. Just as before, we're going to use the default, which is user. we'll search for member of, so all of the attributes that equal member of for my user, and doing a base search. That's the LDAP configuration. Not too bad when you know what you're looking for. And we're going to set up, lastly, we're going to tell our MongoDB. Uh-oh, there's extra spaces all over the place. It's OK. We're going to tell MongoDB that we want to log in with LDAP or with Scram SHA-1. So we'll do our authentication mechanisms, and we'll set that to plain and Scram SHA-1. OK. We'll right quit that. Show of hands. Who thinks I did it right the first time? Oh, OK. That's exactly how I feel. It's cool. Here we go. All right. We got it. So we have our MongoDB started up. We took a look at our user. We didn't look at the groups that I belong to, but we'll get there in a second. MongoDB started on our first try, and now we're going to create a role in MongoDB that's going to correspond to groups that I belong to. So we're going to jump over. We don't have any idea of what this user. So if you're a DBA, or often what I see is that the admin for this that's setting it up, the Active Directory, the security team, they give you a bind user and a bind password, and they say go, and then they give you nothing else. So we'll try and work around what you need to do in that kind of situation. But in our case here, we know that our user belongs to specific groups, and we can find the ones that I belong to. So let's check the root user, or the root group. So if we look at the root group, and we check the distinguished name for it, what I'm essentially doing is I'm going to say that if a user belongs to the root group, we're going to set these privileges in MongoDB, and let's just say that they're root privileges. So anyone who belongs to the root group will have root privileges in MongoDB. I think that makes sense. So let's set that up. We'll do db.createUser. db.createRole. And that is a function with a document. And inside that document, we have our role. And I've copy-pasted my role name. I'm on Mac now. Yeah. OK, and I have our privileges. And we're not going to set any specific privileges because we're going to use the built-in role rooted admin. So we're creating our role. Our role matches our distinguished name of our group. Uh-oh. I should have asked if anybody believed that I was going to set this one up right. OK, so typer's going to come up. Create role had the wrong type. Expected a string. Received an array. No problem. The issue is right here. It's supposed to be roles. Next time, gadget. All right. Got our role created. Let's go ahead and test authentication. So we'll use our $external database because we are logging in using LDAP, not actually checking the MongoDB database for users. db.auth. We'll set our mechanism. Our mechanism is plain. Once again, code for LDAP. Our username will be kip. Our password. Nobody told anyone, right? Hey, check it out. Logged in using LDAP. So we'll check our roles now, or we'll check, the roles that we've received, and maybe take a quick picture of this command because it's super helpful. db.run command and its connection status 1. I'm going to be running it a lot, so not too bad. And what we'll see are all the groups that I belong to. But specifically, we can see this one right here that doesn't look like a distinguished name, and that is going to be our root admin privileges in MongoDB. Very cool. We got that set up. All right. So we did our example authentication. We created our role in MongoDB, started a MongoDB instance. We checked Active Directory. So now let's tie this back. So we're setting up 30,000 of these users, right? So ostensibly, someone else should be in this group. So if I go back to our group here, I should also be able to log into anyone else that belongs to it, right? So there's a lot of these kip guys. I don't know what's going on. It's like he uses it for testing or something. Let's go with kip 05. And let's say that, let's add him to the group. So right now he only belongs to domain users, and we'll add him into root. And I think that, yep. So now we have him as part of root, and if we check root here, we can see that this is the same distinguished name. And if I come back to our database, I should be able to log in with the same user here. So I'm making this face because I'm not sure if kip05 has the same password, but it's OK. We'll find out very shortly. Opportunity cost 0. Kip05, password, password. Hey, look at that. So just because you exist in the database does not mean that you have any privileges. Now we check our db.run command. I can type db.run command and connection status 1. There we go. So what happened? My user exists. I have my password set up. Don't have any authenticated user roles. So we know that the user exists in MongoDB, or excuse me, exists in LDAP. We know that we just added them to the group that they should belong to. Why don't they have any authenticated user roles? And that's a great question. And so what we'll do for setting this up, is that 80 minutes already?
That's time.
Is that right? In the first session, right? So I should have until 4:10? Yeah. Oh, I had no idea that there was more people that were coming to a second part of a session. Neat. Yeah, if you guys want to take a quick break, yeah. So here we are again. Those of you who are new, we kind of went over a bit of an LDAP primer at the beginning. We started setting up a MongoDB instance, and we were successful on the first time, which is great. We've done a couple login attempts, and we're going to follow up by going over a series of issues that you might run into as you're setting this up on your own. That wasn't me. All right. So what we're going to do here is, what was I working on before I had to stop? I think we logged in with the user. We made sure that the user existed in the database. Kip05, yeah. Why isn't Kip05 authenticating? That's right. Hey, thanks, guys. OK, so why isn't he authenticating? What's going on there? So we'll check the user, and let's make sure. So for those of you that are new, I will give you the disclaimer, and that is that I'm not an LDAP expert. I just know what I think works, and it should work. That said, if you see anything that's awry or I'm giving bad information, feel free to call me out. I'm totally prepared to be called out on things. Also, I do make typos as I'm doing these demonstrations. I intended to do this live and make at least a few mistakes because oftentimes when I'm setting it up, and I've done this many, many times, I still make mistakes. We'll talk through them so that way you can see them and experience just how you would go about troubleshooting those issues. So most recently, last time on user authorization without you, we tried to log in with the user, kip05. We were able to successfully authenticate, but we received no roles from the database. We expect the user to be able to log in, so what happened? So the first thing that we want to check is make sure that kip05 is the user that we actually want to log in with. Look at that. Wow. OK, so we're logging in with the kip05 user, and let's check the database again. And let's just go through it one more time to make sure that nothing crazy is happening. And we will authenticate, db.auth, indicating our mechanism, which will be plain, our user, which will be kip05, and our password, which will be password, which I think is password. OK, able to log in. Sorry, 1 second. Things are like falling over. Got it. And we're going to run our command to check what privileges that we have. db.run command. And connection status 1. All right. So here's our user. We definitely still not receiving any roles. So before we move forward with troubleshooting this, now is the time that I want to tell you guys about our configuration file. So anytime we're making changes in this configuration file, we're trying to do testing. If we make a change, the way for us to test it in MongoDB, we have to restart it. If you're doing this in production or in QA, or you have a change control process, maybe you're not able to just restart your MongoDB whenever you want. I can restart it willy-nilly because I have no self-control. But if you do need to maintain some sort of semblance of order, MongoDB gives you a great utility called MongoLDAP. And what MongoLDAP does is that it will test configurations that you write, or it'll test a configuration file and do test authentications to see if you can log in. And it'll tell you the users and the roles that you'll belong to. That way you don't have to keep restarting MongoDB. So let's test our users. We'll test our first user, which will be kip05, and we'll do our password. It's difficult to password twice in 2 different ways. And we'll point it to our configuration file. And so still returning nothing here, but we're not sure why it doesn't return. So let's come back over to our database. And the first thing that we'll do is check the user one more time. Check our member of. Anybody notice what happened? Did anybody actually catch what I did? So I set it to root. I never hit apply. So here we go. We're gonna run our same command. Use $external. db.run command. Oh, excuse me. We're gonna off db.off. And mechanism. For those of you that are new, plain is code for LDAP. It's not actually code. It's actually a thing. But username is kip05, and our password is password. Logged in fine. Check our connection status. Look at that. So we have our users, and what I primarily wanted to show was that you could log in, that you can test your user logins without actually having to restart your MongoDB. But we'll go over some more stuff in a second. Do you have a question?
Yeah, you want to take a question now?
Yeah, if you have a question, I can.
Okay. When Kip05 wasn't in any role that Mongo knows about, how was he authenticated?
Right. So this comes back to what's the difference between authentication and authorization. So the question was, how was my user able to log into the database even though no roles were assigned to the user? And so what happened was that my user exists in the database, and I was able to authenticate. I was able to provide my password and say, I am indeed Kip05. And so I was able to get in. And then when I checked my connection, you would see that I had no roles assigned because I didn't have the correct permissions.
Because authorization is off. If authorization is on, then it counts.
So if authorization was, so the question now is, was this because authorization is off? And the answer is no. Because although authorization is off, I still would have been able to log in, but I just wouldn't have been able to do anything as the user. So when you enable LDAP authentication, any user that the database can find is able to log in. What that user is able to do is dependent on what you set the authorization to. Okay. So now we're going to go over some quick stuff. We've gone over everything in our little slide deck here, and we're going to go to our next section, which is maybe we should have practiced. But first thing that we're going to do is users in multiple OUs. So this has gone over before, but what you'll see in all kinds of places is that people will be distributed in different organizational units based on their geo, based on their division. They're just everywhere. And a lot of times, we're not responsible for it. We just need to make it work. So this is how we do it. Yes. First, what we'll need to do is let's actually identify our users that we want to log in with. So we'll start off by, we have our users. We have kip underneath our cn equals users, LDAP, and underneath the domain ldap.kip.com. Underneath that, we also have, I'm going to use sum. Underneath, so we have another OU called sum, and the distinguished name of this container would be OU equals sum, comma, DC equals LDAP, comma, DC equals kip, comma, DC equals com. And if I wanted to find this user lost, I would have to be able to search underneath that domain or underneath that OU, right? Right now, my search searches everything. It's on ldap.kip.com. It goes underneath everything, and we'll see that. We see that here. So let's actually exit out of that. Let's edit our configuration, and we look at our user to DN mapping. So in our user to DN mapping, we have our match rule here, right? And let's give it a little more space. Okay, so in our first match rule, what we see is searching our entire base. And so what we'll do is we'll make this narrower, so it's not searching the entire base. And one reason why you might do that is because if you have, say, 30,000 users, it can take a very long time when LDAP starts to receive lots of authentication attempts for this to return. And if that happens, you can actually time out on your connection attempts because LDAP is essentially overloaded. So to prevent that, what we've done is we've specified, OK, I'm only going to search on CN equals users because there's fewer objects for LDAP to search or LDAP to check when I run my search. OK, that should be it. All right, so that's our first match rule. And I didn't go over this before, but when you're setting up a user DN mapping, I did say that it is an array of documents. So when you're logging in and doing your authorization checks, or your authentication checks, right, checking to see the user exists, and you're doing your user DN mapping, it goes through every document in the array in order. So it'll start off by running through this match, and then I can add another rule that it'll match in the event that no objects are returned. So what we'll do here is we'll set the same regex rule, regex 101, regex expr. If you're not familiar, not too difficult if you've played with it. No time to talk about it now. And now what we'll do is we'll say cn. Let's do this. So we're going to write and quit this with just a bad query. And let's actually show that we can't log in with the lost user right now. So we'll set up Mongo LDAP. We set our user, which is, let's just use this one, right? And we can see the roles that are acquired by the Mongo LDAP tool. And now we'll try to do the same search, but this time with the user lost. OK, lost. Let's talk about this error. So I did say, I gave you guys a disclaimer. I'm going to make mistakes. And when I make mistakes, we're going to talk through them because everyone makes mistakes, I hope. Our first thing here is that there are no matching transformations out of 2 available transformations. And so we created 2 match rules. And in our first match rule, we searched for CN users, DC equals LDAP, DC equals kip, DC equals com. We know that our user lost doesn't exist underneath that structure. So we know that it shouldn't return. The next thing that shows up, or this error makes sense, right? Does anybody disagree with that doesn't make sense? OK, great. The next one is that the user is not found. That's the same one. And then here, underneath that, we have our next rule, find my mouse. Very difficult with the trackpad. I don't recommend it for next time. What we see here is that we have our bad LDAP query, which wouldn't have worked regardless, but it failed to parse, right? It's failed to substitute a component into the filter. It's saying that our capture group 0 is missing. So let's fix that. And we'll say that let's fix our LDAP query. And we're going to say, let's actually comment this out real quick. One other thing that I want to demonstrate for you guys is doing our search. Doing our search without being able to find the user. And so we'll run our query again. And this time, we are unable to parse the, I should mention this fail up here, which is we're running this without TLS. Those of you that have been with me for a little bit, we didn't set up TLS because it takes more time, and I'm very lazy. OK, so parsing MongoDB LDAP to obtain DN mappings. It's saying that it's a match here, and it failed to parse the JSON description. It means that I have a typo, and it's basically going to mean that I need to fix this. So I'll show you guys how we don't find a user afterwards, and instead we're going to go right into finding this user. All right, so our OU in this case is sum. Our DC equals LDAP, DC equals kip, DC equals com. And we have 4 different fields. We return all attributes, do a sub search, and we'll find user principal name is equal to 0 at ldap.kip.com. Capture group 0 at ldap.kip.com. So now we should be able to find the user in the event that we do a search. User lost. And Kip, you still have typos in your, this one, still the same error. Kip, you have typos.
Can you see comment?
Probably. Yep, thanks guys. This is what I need. This is why you're here. Wait a second. Hey, there we go. So we are successful. We're able to go and find our user. That user doesn't have any roles that match in the database. In fact, that user doesn't have any groups as far as we can tell. But let's add the user to a couple groups just to show that we can. You're doing it because you can. You never asked if you should. I'm just adding him to a group. Don't be so mean, Dad. Let's actually just add him to root because I know that that one exists. And we'll check our names. We said OK. We hit apply. And now we run the same command. Uh-oh. Did I hit it? Am I hitting the right user? OK. Another piece here. What I wanted to show, another thing that I'm going to show you is here, ambiguous users. So underneath my, I've definitely added my user this time. I hit apply just like I didn't do last time. I know that I'm accessing the right user. What's going on? Why can't I log in with this user? So if I check the account, it turns out that this isn't the lost user. This is the lost to user. One of the things that's going to come up, that may come up in your environment, is that because user principal name can be whatever you want, which is a DN, you can make yourself very confused. You can, or.
Can you make a font bigger by any chance? I barely see.
I actually have no idea how to do that with Windows here. But it says lost to at ldap.kip.com.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Let me know if there's anything else that you need help seeing. But effectively, this user that I've added to the group isn't the one that I actually searched for. So which one did I search for? So we're going to use a different tool here. One thing that, well, first let's use our lost to, make sure that it actually did work. There we go. So one thing that was asked of me in between, go ahead.
Just a real quick question. So you've added those 2 different things, but back to our earlier question about mergers and acquisitions where you've got users from 2 different branches. Doesn't this fix that for you?
Yep, that's exactly what this is for.
Just following up on our earlier chat.
Yeah, no problem. OK, so the other thing that I wanted to do is totally gone from my head now. We set up the user in different OUs. We checked the lost. We have lost to, and then we wanted to make sure. Oh, so a question that was asked to me in between was, well, my admins just gave me a bind user and a bind password, and I have no idea where my user exists in the structure. So a tool that you might use, and we're kind of venturing outside the realm of MongoDB here, but I like to use LDAP search. Or if you have access to Active Directory, you might use LDP or ADSI. All of these will work. I use LDAP search. And what we can do with LDAP search is we can use the bind user that we were given. So let's say that I was given a bind user, which is vagrant, vagrant at ldap.kip.com. And we have a password, which is vagrant. And then we need to find, now we need to find my user as exists. So that way I can import them into the database correctly. So we're going to, we actually have to set our DC, LDAP DC, and set our search base we set our search base to the top of the tree because all we know is the domain that we belong to. DC equals LDAP, DC equals kip, DC equals com. And then, so let's say that we don't know anything at all about anybody that exists in this group. We run our search. We have 305 responses. In theory, you should have been added as a user to this LDAP directory, or to Active Directory or Open LDAP. So what you might want to do is start searching for yourself. So I know that my username, my user principal name, right, we've used it lots of times, is equal to kip@ldap.kip.com. And that returns just one entry. And then we can we're using Linux, so I mean, I just grep it out. And we can find our DN, or distinguished name. And there we are. Now we have the full path to my user. And we can say, hey, kip existed under users LDAP kip.com without ever having been given anything except our DN and the server that, or our bind user and the database that we need to connect to. We wouldn't actually be able to do that very easily in Mongo LDAP because we're querying for the roles, but it's just something that may come up as you're practicing your administration. Okay, next thing, one other piece on ambiguous users. So three usernames are guaranteed to be unique. And I mentioned this at the beginning, but so those of you that didn't get it, here it is. There are 3 that are unique: the distinguished name, the user principal name, the SAM account name. Guaranteed to be unique in Active Directory. SAM account name doesn't exist in Open LDAP. Anyway, if for whatever reason you decide to search for users based on a non-unique name, say for instance, we decide, let's go ahead and search for users that belong to CN equals users. And instead of using user principal name, we'll use CN, or the common name, is equal to whatever the user types in. So we've decided that we've by the powers that be, we've decided to make this mistake. And now we run our Mongo LDAP. And we're going to search for the lost user. So in this case, we're looking specifically for the common name. We look for the lost user. We get our failure as expected. And our first one returns no results because it's in the wrong section. Lost is under a different OU. And our second rule gives us a interesting error, which is CN loss actually return no results. So this is actually a mistake from what I was trying to test. But the user is not found. And the reason here is because CN equals lost at ldap.kip.com. That's not what I wanted to search. My user to DN mapping is adding that extra piece. And so we'll remove that real quickly here. And we can see that here in my match rule. So we're, excuse the VI. I'm getting better. But you can see right here in the match rule, CN equals whatever the user types in, and then we're appending that at ldap.kip.com in our match rule. So we'll just remove that. And now we're effectively searching on CN equals lost. We'll right quit that, run our command, and here we are. Find the mouse. We can do it. User data inconsistent. Returned multiple results. If you run into this error, just perhaps revise your administration strategy or your user management strategy, because this can be very impossible to really deal with. There are ways around it. Very difficult. I'd advise against it in general. All right. Next piece here is case sensitivity. So I didn't talk about this earlier, but LDAP is case aware, not case sensitive. So anything that you type into LDAP, say you set your username to kip, but it's all uppercase. When that user gets returned from LDAP, it's going to be all in uppercase. MongoDB, however, is case sensitive for all of its username authentication or databases or that we're creating. And so if you have this disparity, you'll run into errors. The user's not found, or the user doesn't belong to any groups. And we'll demonstrate that in a second here. But copy your distinguished names. Make sure that you're giving yourself as little room for error as possible when it comes to setting up these users. So in our user DN mapping, we have our users here. Everything looks good. And what we'll do is we're going to take a look at another user, find the mouse, log into Windows again. All right. So our lost user, let's use user under users. So let's say kip05 again. And now what we're going to do is we're going to add them to another group. This time, instead of root, we're going to add them to, I think there's one called subgroup. Yeah. So we'll add this user to subgroup. We can check subgroup here, check the attribute editor, copy that distinguished name, right? Notice the casing, subgroup. OK, so we're going to create this in MongoDB now. So anybody who belongs to this group will have whatever permission we give it in MongoDB. Connect to our shell, use admin, db.create role, and our role that we're going to create is role is equal to, and you're on Mac now. Paste that in. Our privileges are going to be empty, and our roles, we made that mistake earlier, are going to be a built-in role, and we're going to give it read, write, any database. But unfortunately, I made a mistake. I decided at some point that I'm going to just start capitalizing random letters because, hey, it's the same, and it's not case sensitive in LDAP, and my search is working, so it's cool. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. You did it again, Kip. you forgot to add a colon somewhere? What'd you do? Quotes, privileges, roles. Role equals, my goodness. All right. So, set that up. Belongs to subgroup. So now I should be able to log in with the KIP user. And actually, let's remove him from the root. Let's remove him from root, so that way there's less confusion, right? Oh, this is subgroup. So members, good. Let's go to root. Check the members. KIP05 will remove you from that one. Yes. Apply that. Don't forget to apply. Lots of places to make mistakes. OK, so now we're going to use $external db.auth. Actually, let's run our db.run command. Let's make sure that we're not actually auth with anything first. Connection status 1. No roles. We're just some random authenticated or random user on the database. Now we're going to authenticate db.auth. We're going to set our mechanism, code word LDAP. Username is going to be kip05, and our password will be password. It's a secret. Auth OK. Check our connection status. Look at that. What's going on? You are actually part of subgroup, and this looks good, right? But let's take a look at something here. If I go back over to our database, right? Use admin. I run db.getRoles. I should have read write any database somewhere in that list. So let's auth again, and this time we're going to auth use admin, and we're going to run db.auth, and we'll auth as the base KIP user. Very cool guy. Plain. You think I'd copy paste this at some time, but copy pasting stuff with the trackpad, it's just so horrible. Oh my goodness. So is typing. Password. OK. Plain user password. Uh-oh, I might have to copy paste. comma. OK. Let's troubleshoot this real quick. I'm trying to log in with the user KIP. Authentication failed. Let's take a look and see why. So what we'll first do is check our configuration. Make sure that I didn't change any of my user to DN mappings that would prevent me from finding the KIP user. So the first rule is searching under users, LDAP kip.com, user principal name. Looks like it should be finding the KIP at ldap.kip.com user without any issue there. So let's check and see what MongoDB is saying. Use less, mongodb.log. When we take a look, plain authentication failed for KIP at admin. KIP, what have you done? Does anybody know what I did? That's right. So let's go back into it. We'll hop into Mongo, use $external, and now we'll db.auth as myself. User KIP. A. check our run command, and check this out. So I am part of subgroup as well, but also notice that I have this one root at admin, which matches up with matches up here, right? We created that earlier for those of you that are just joining us, but we should see something just like this for the KIPO5 user, and it doesn't show up. And we know why, and that's because I was just changing casing randomly on my role, right? So we can go back to our use admin, we can go back to our create role, we can jump back over here very quickly and say, hey, maybe just do this like you're supposed to. Use $external. I believe you're all safe, but I'm not sure. db.auth. And our mechanism will be plain. Our user will be kip05. And our password will be password. Oh, no. No. Come on. Typing is. You can do it. Plain user. Is it the space? No, it's not the space. Missing. I need my. Thanks, guys. Got to get that in there. Hey, you guys are supposed to call me out immediately. And there we are. We have our read write at any database as configured. Okay. Lots to be aware of. Very last thing that I'll go over: smart quotes. So I've indicated to you guys many times, copy paste whenever possible. Some things, like for instance Google Docs, you write in a couple, you write your quote and then you type in a name, and those quotes these are smart quotes. And if you copy paste them into the database, they aren't read correctly. It is horrible to troubleshoot, but I'm telling you right now that if you do what you're supposed to do and you're copy pasting and you're making, like you're a good admin, you just keep track of all your commands, it'll show up. Just be prepared, and then you can hate them just like me. And we'll be a big group of people that hate smart quotes. All right, that's it for the talk. I don't have any more time, but if you guys need to get any more documentation, we have lots of great documentation on our website going through LDAP with Active Directory, with Open LDAP, setting up with SASLauth, setting up with Kuros. Also, we have the M310 coursework, which I highly recommend. Goes over some of this as well, and in addition, your Kerberos setup, other security issues that you might want to address. And finally, I made it to the question and answers. No, please no. Okay, go ahead. Real quick. So, sorry, if you guys can be just a little bit quieter. I'm sorry. So I think that you asked that whether or not you can set password complexity rules in MongoDB. So MongoDB does not natively enforce any password complexity. However, because you're using LDAP authorization, LDAP does has password complexity, and you would set it there. So when you're creating your user, you would set, that's a domain policy. Yeah, so when you log into the LDAP server, that's where it's configured. It's part of your Windows administration, not part of your MongoDB administration. Yeah. Okay. I'll see you guys later. You guys can come talk to me if you have more of it.